Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to a special, I could say, coffee chat with the amazing Claudia Gray, who has joined us once more to talk about her amazing books, and the most recent one especially, Master and Apprentice. Welcome, Claudia.
Hi there. Thanks for having me back.
I don't know. I feel like now it's an open invitation anytime that you want to talk about anything at all, because I think that the episode that we recorded back in March was so much fun because we got to kind of deep dive into some of the things about Star Wars that really set it apart in some storytelling from other stories out there right now, but yet also make it very familiar to humanistic stories. Yes, thank you again for coming on the show before and accepting the invite now.
No problem at all. Now what will we dive into?
Well, today you had a book that came out in April.
I did. I had two, actually, but I know which one we're going to talk about.
Well, this one is the Star Wars one.
Yes.
Just to kind of start and set the world, I really wanted to understand what was the appeal of talking about this particular timeline, that it's set before, the Phantom Menace. It's kind of in a nomad land.
Mm-hmm.
Except for, of course, now we have Dooku Jedi Lost that has come out that definitely peers further back in time. And actually, through the course of your own book, you actually allude to times way past this, which is fun too. Did you want to talk about that?
I'm glad you brought up Jedi Lost. And I think you already knew this, or we may have touched on it during the first podcast, but Kevin, Scott, and I were very much in touch with each other while we were working on those projects. So we were able to sort of align what Dooku and Qui-Gon would have been like as Master and Apprentice, and Rael ended up strolling from my book over to Cav's play, and he wrote better dialogue for Rael than I do, and how dare he? But it was really fun to go back into that era, and there's less, which means there are fewer things to sort of pick up on. There's less canon there, but it also means you've got a little bit more freedom to play. And it was also just fun writing about a time when it's the Republic, and nobody yet sees that it's very close to falling apart. The Phantom Menace is where you see the first real cracks. There are hints of things that aren't going well, and Qui-Gon's aware, but the galaxy at large still thinks, it's been like this for thousands of years. It's going to be like this for thousands more.
Yeah, like they've almost become like comfortably numb with the corruption, with the underlying issues of the Republic, and in some ways the Jedi Order too.
Yeah, there's a lot of complacency, I guess you would say. And even Qui-Gon is not fully aware, but he's more aware than most. I think the events of Master and Apprentice help clarify that for him.
But he also doesn't really, I would say, at the outcome of this whole book, and maybe I should have clarified this to begin with, but this will be a full spoiler conversation. So go back if you're not interested, because we're gonna go all over the place. But what I really found fascinating about Qui-Gon is that although he had his mind set by the end of the book on, things are about to change, or there's going to be things, in some ways what the prophecy was leaning towards and his place in it and his resolution, he didn't necessarily know what it all meant just yet, and I felt that to be really interesting to see out of his character. Like he seems very wise in The Phantom Menace, and he seems wise in this book too, but maybe more lost.
I feel like he's wise, but he's overinterpreting the prophecies even when he's trying so hard not to, because his idea about this balance to the Force and this great change in the time of prophecy, he sees this as change to the good. And, ultimately, I guess it gets there, but wow, the price that's paid over the next, 50 years of the galaxy is pretty devastating. And he doesn't sense that. I think really maybe the events of the Phantom Menace, that's got to be so much vindication and clarification for him. Like, yes, here we are. This things are beginning, but even he doesn't understand the sheer scale of what is beginning.
Well, and like to say the time of prophecy is at hand, like even in one of the prophecies, is really fascinating because we actually kind of see it happening. And, you know, as I was reviewing my notes and thinking about the book, I was like, whoa, Anakin is alive at this point in the timeline. Like,
yeah, because he is. He's a little baby.
He's a baby. We don't even know if he's on Tatooine or not. Like, where was he born? We don't know anything about where he's at, but the time of prophecy is at hand because the Chosen One is born.
Yeah. That's interesting. I never really concretely thought about it, but you're right. It really is turning. It really is happening. He's not wrong. You know, it's just, he can't. There's no way anybody could really fully grasp the sheer scale of what was about to happen.
So why is Qui-Gon important? Like either to you or to the story? Or both?
Yeah, I feel like Qui-Gon, more than anybody else we get, at least in film and TV canon to date, is, well, with one huge exception, and I'll get back to that, but he's the one who's very much sort of in touch with the Force in a very personal way. Now, of course, the ultimate example of that is Yoda in Empire Strikes Back. But throughout the prequels, you know, that's not where Yoda is. He's a bureaucrat and he's wrong all the time. And you know that he has this immense wisdom, but he's not using it. And he has this ability to be hugely connected to the living Force, and he's not. He's gotten away from, you know, it can happen even to Yoda, you know, that these things can happen. And
it very much shows like that Yoda needed failure to like reconnect
the greatest
with his purpose and the Force and back to the Last Jedi and those lessons, right?
Yeah. And I think, though, with Qui-Gon, you do see somebody who, you know, he's loyal to the Jedi. He's loyal to the Republic. He's filling his duty, but his relationship to the Force is his. His interpretations of things are his. He is not in sort of that lockstep organization that's beginning to fall apart. Like, he's pulled back enough that we get this sense, I think, of a greater perspective from him and a connection to more of what the Jedi would have been another 100, 200 years back, maybe.
Yeah, I definitely got the impression that both what Qui-Gon represented in Master and Apprentice and, you know, a little bit of a spoilers into Dooku Jedi Lost, some of the masters that were a little outside of the bounds of the current doctrine were a little bit more leaning on the previous generation of Jedi's teachings. Yeah,
the idea is that things were a little more mystical, a little less political, perhaps. And obviously, deviations from the norm sometimes don't work out well. You know, example one, Dooku.
Yeah.
But I think Qui-Gon is a very valuable perspective for that. I think he's very important. The other character that I think you glimpse it in is Chirrut in Rogue One.
Right.
Yeah. We don't quite spend enough time with him to get more of a perspective rather than to know, like, yeah, this guy has it. He has it himself. He's not teaching you, which is sort of unusual. We don't really run into other very wise, you know, very studied Force users who aren't there to instruct in the narrative in some way. He's just being the guardian. And that's interesting. But I feel like with Qui-Gon, you get a much fuller sense of what's going on in the greater scheme of things.
Well, and especially like his disagreements with the Jedi Council being offered to come on the Jedi Council, but eventually turning it down. His overall perspective of the Jedi maybe not aligning fully with what they should be or what they could be.
Right.
It's really interesting how that almost ongoing conversation happens throughout the book. And, you know, it's questioned by Obi-Wan, who is in some ways like the teacher's pet of everybody. Like he absolutely needs to do the rules, like live by the rules.
Yeah. And one thing I really wanted to get at with the book, because I think especially in genre fandom, we really tend to automatically admire and sympathize with the renegades and the rule breakers and this, and feel like, oh, if you're following the rules, then somehow you're kind of stuck. in mud, or you're not thinking for yourself, whereas, I see with Obi-Wan, I see it more as he really fundamentally believes in the ideals behind the rules, and he's trusting in that as a greater wisdom. It's not the easy default choice always. It can be really hard in the heat of a moment to look at your principle, go, I'm going to hold true to that, even though I'm not sure what's going on. That can be a very powerful and meaningful and moral choice.
In a D&D setting, he's a paladin, like absolutely lawful good. Like must,
yes,
the rules are there for a reason. And
I like that.
It's not for me to question that,
Right. I really believe this.
Yeah.
And if I didn't, I wouldn't be a Jedi, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to get at that with him too, because I definitely wanted him and Qui-Gon, they always care about each other. They always like each other. But I think each of them gets to respect the other's perspective in a greater sense, without changing.
Yeah.
Changing who they are, but a greater respect for where that can be coming from and how either approach may be right given the circumstances.
Like seeking to understand, an alternate perspective is so important for, moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I really appreciated both of these characters in this book. And truthfully, like neither Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon has ever been my absolute favorite character. I've actually found, I know, but you actually like brought it out of me that I appreciate both of them now. So
Good.
Thank you. And I've appreciated them as part of Star Wars and what they were trying to say, but like Qui-Gon, especially in The Phantom Menace, always seemed very, I don't know how to put it, like off-putting in some ways, like,
That was the thing that, The Phantom Menace was maybe not exactly what all of us had been hoping for since 1983, particularly if you were a kid who grew up with it, but like that was the character that I was like, it's all been worth it for this, this guy, and it's still my favorite of the prequels, even though I fully understand that Revenge of the Sith is by, any measure a superior movie. But does it have Qui-Gon in it? It does not.
No.
So there we are.
I like that he sees through, Padme's disguise. And, on a side note, I loved the interconnection and how much this Jedi Lost and Queen Shadow felt related to each other. It felt like they were all siblings in some ways from a story perspective. So thank you for the effort it took to like make sure they felt interconnected and had that interwoven story texture. So thank you for that. That's great to see these three books kind of come out in such a short period, or three stories come out in such a short period of time that felt connected. It was like getting our own mini prequel, mini trilogy.
Yeah, I can only take a sliver of the credit, but I'll take my sliver. But yeah, it's been fun to be able to flesh out that era, which is clearly a very important and interesting time, but not something that we've spent a lot of time with. So at least, before the Clone Wars begin, everything's still a little open. So yeah, it's just a field to play in, and I'm glad that all of us were sort of able to get on the same page. No puns intended.
So I wanted to talk, just deep diving before we get kind of into character, but more like setting to do with, the Jedi and the Republic and the relationship and what is the state of the galaxy, at this time and place. It's really fascinating how much the larger themes of the Phantom Menace that Qui-Gon brings up himself, you brought into the book, especially the idea of symbiosis. And even, Yoda's like, it always takes two. It's not just you that's responsible for this relationship with your Padawan,
right.
Qui-Gon. It's both of you. You both have to come to the table.
Right.
And the idea that there's ideas of symbiotic things throughout the universe, and maybe that there is things that are off balance throughout, especially like how certain like Zerka Corporation is using the rules of the government to promote what is considered to be an evil activity, even by the Jedi, which is slavery. And they just sort of allow it to happen.
Right. Yeah. I liked the conversation. I liked writing the conversation that Qui-Gon and Yoda have about this, because Yoda has one good point, which is that the Jedi must not rule. That kind of power is corrupting, but it's almost been taken to the, it's been taken to the other extreme where you've abdicated almost all this responsibility and ceded over entirely to the Republic, which is ultimately as or more destructive. So yeah, it was interesting to sort of get into like how do they justify that? And it's sort of, from one good point, then you can sort of work out and justify almost anything.
Yeah. And they didn't want to be warlords,
Right.
they didn't want to be the authoritarian. And so they abdicated all responsibility for the galaxy and became, almost tools or puppets of whatever force was in charge of the Republic at the time.
Yeah, I don't know I'd go tool. I don't know that I'd go puppet, but tools, yeah. I mean, they're almost the police force of the great galaxy by the time we do that. And the fact that this is, a religious discipline, and a spiritual practice, it's too distant from what's going on. And I think it's clear from the prequels that this, a huge ingredient in the disaster
is them not taking that spirituality. I don't know, like what is that missing ingredient? Like, is it that they abdicated all responsibility or judgment?
Well, I think when you have the Jedi completely aligned with the Republic, then you don't have another great galactic force question the Republic, or perhaps a few centuries back, the Jedi were capable of offering perspective on and to the Republic,
like the sober second thought from the Jedi.
Yeah. That perspective and that distance that's necessary for perspective, it's been lost by the time of Master and Apprentice and Phantom Menace. It's gone.
In the end, they report to the Chancellor rather than to say what the universe is telling them. And that's very apparent in, their denial of prophecy, their denial of listening to the Force, basically.
Yes.
What is the Force telling them?
Right. And I tried to portray Qui-Gon as somebody who had maybe always been more inclined to do that he had very strong instincts in that area, but the events of Master and Apprentice, hopefully, that's that draws him into it in the way we see him in the Phantom Menace, where, very strong conviction, very strong, and he's capable of defying what it has to go by what's right.
I liked how you pointed out that Qui-Gon can't really read emotions off of people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really interesting because it really showed, part of the problems that he and many of the characters in the book were experiencing was about a failure to communicate correctly.
Yeah, it's a huge element in it. Or sometimes Qui-Gon can pick up emotions, but he completely misascribes them. He thinks, oh, this is coming from that. And it's like, no, that is not. But yeah, there are a lot of people who simply do not know how to talk in these books.
Rael and Fanray, if they had just had a conversation at some point about what she wants and what he wants and worked it out, Pax and Rahara, they just needed to have a chat at some point that wasn't awkward.
The poor Pax. I think he's sort of stuck with awkward.
Yeah, but, his dial is always on awkward.
Right. He's not going to turn silver tongued on us at any time, and he was communicating way too bluntly.
Yeah.
That is a big element of it.
It very much ties back to Padme's lines in this war. This is all coming about because we have a failure to communicate. And I felt like you primed that up very well in Master and Apprentice, in that that is constantly the problem, is people aren't actually talking to each other and working it out.
And you have just so many influences at work in that time period, with the Trade Federation and different planets feeling restless and sort of this increasing sort of maybe spiritual gap with the Jedi, maybe weakening some belief in the Force sort of throughout that. Definitely, I wanted to have that brief moment with the Hutts in the beginning, mostly because we get the contrast between that, where the Hutts know, okay, we can do this, we can do that, but we can't mess with the Jedi, to the Clone Wars, where the Jedi have to make a deal with the Hutts.
Yeah.
They're gaining power rapidly. they're testing their limit, because they sense like, the soft spot. There's this back about to be able to do more than they ever could when the Republic was functioning the way that it was.
They're very aware of the political landscape and when they will be able to take their opportunities when the Jedi are at their weakest.
Yeah, that, or at least this guy's Major Domo.
Oh, that guy was awesome.
Thurible? Yeah.
Yeah, Thurible. Yeah, I was like, I crave underworld politics, and I hope we get some like beautiful ones with the Mandalorian, but I really want to see some like interplay where people are doing machinations and trying to gain holds over other people, get people to owe them, like everything that was obviously happening behind the scenes of Solo, with all of the different like political organizations like the Pikes, and everybody owes each other, and there's tenuous relationships. I just want to see that in detail. So Lucasfilm, get that out there at some point.
I'm guessing the Mandalorian's going to give us plenty of that. It looks so good.
It looks so good. Did you get a chance to see the trailer?
I couldn't get into the room at Celebration, but of course, like everybody else, I've watched it on YouTube.
Yeah, it's like, why not just show it on YouTube, I think.
Yeah, when I first heard about it, I was actually really underwhelmed because Boba Fett is not really high up on the list of things I'm interested in Star Wars, like at all.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, so it's Diet Boba Fett. Great. But then they started announcing the other names that were involved with it. I was like, oh, Taika Waititi is going to direct? That's actually really interesting to me. And they started casting all these cool people. And then from the moment I heard Werner Herzog, I was like, I'm in. I'm completely in. If it were just Werner Herzog sitting in a Star Wars thing, just talking about how the universe is completely corrupt, like if that was all the show was, I would watch it every night. For some reason, I find Werner Herzog incredibly watchable and have for many years. And he's such a dark genius and a complete original. And it's so out of the box to think of him for that kind of a part.
Yeah.
Already I'm like, okay, there's some real imagination put in here. These are some people that are really bringing cool ideas to the table. So now I'm super psyched.
I got into the panel and, it's Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau sitting there, and John's like, yeah, so I've started to appreciate the prequels, and Dave has made me read the hero's journey. And I like screamed because I was like, yay, you're going to Jedi school, John. Dave made you go to Jedi school.
That's great.
Yeah, no, he's doing really well. I'm excited because of the variety of directors for the individual episodes, the a diverse and interesting cast. Like I'm very excited to see what's going to come out from the TV shows, especially, or the streaming shows.
I'm assuming it's going to start up the minute that Disney Plus starts up. 3 days later for them to work out. Is it like beginning of November? Is that it?
Yeah, I think it's mid-November.
Okay.
That the official date is, and then we're getting the Rogue One streaming show at some point in the future too.
Right.
Yeah. A Rogue One prequel. So sorry, that was a little tangent, but I'm just really excited for it.
Good.
Yeah. I wanted to, of course, deep dive into and understand the Jedi attachment.
Right.
I would say it's actually an issue. Let's talk about this issue. They say, attachment bad. Right. Attachment bad. But literally every single one of them is attached to something.
Yeah, it was just for me, just as a fangirl, it was good to have Rael have that speech. Like, we get attached to people all the time. We love people all the time. Masters come to love their apprentices. Apprentices love their masters. We have our friends. What is this? Like, it's a lie we're telling, because people are still having these emotions and these bonds. They're just being taught to be valued. And that is not helpful. It's not helping anybody, and kind of spiritual practice that could make that sort of denial actually have a purpose has faded. So you're left with the rule and not the results. If that makes sense.
Like, why was the rule put in there in the first place? And why does very significant and powerful people within the order basically break it and just kind of ignore the the broken rules, like, you know, tying back to Dooku Jedi Lost, there's actually like a child born of a broken rule.
Yeah.
You have a great line, you know, on Felucia, you broke the spirit of the law into a dozen pieces. I love that quote, by the way, because it makes me go, whoa, Qui-Gon Jinn, what did you do?
Cannot say, but
no, fair,
really
but
want to pull in all these stories. I was like, no, it's a whole lot more fun if we just know something happened and that's it.
I mean, in future storytelling, Claudia, right?
Here's hoping.
Please tell that story at some point in the future. That would be great. Also, Satine and Obi-Wan at some point.
That would be fun. I would love to do that. First, when they told me about this book, I was like so sure that was going to be it. Like, oh my God, they're going to do that thing. And they're like, no, that's not it.
Oh.
All right.
They must have something bigger planned for them.
Maybe they do. And see what that is so I can hunt that person down, because, man, I would love it. But, we'll see it eventually in some form.
I think so. I hope so.
I don't know for sure either, but I got to believe that.
So what is this lying to themselves all about? Like because, you know, a Rail, like celibacy, don't know her.
Never mind. I really feel like, you know, I wonder, and I don't know this, but I've sort of wondered whether it began not as a rule. You know, I mean, even Rail says, like, there have always been some Jedi that consider this, you know, more of a guideline, you know, deal. And my thought was that if you went back a few centuries or a few thousand years, that you might have a much wider range of belief and behavior. That, you know, it was sort of this ideal to maybe separate yourself out and be like just connected to the Force and have this equal relationship with every living being. You know, not that you don't care about any of them, but that you do care, all of them. You know, but that over time this sort of got warped into, you know, celibacy, and let's just lie to ourselves about even our friendships, you know, that it sort of fell to this, you know, it's become an empty, basically. But I can imagine time periods and ways in which that, you know, as an encouraged but possibly voluntary practice really could have had a lot of spiritual significance. But I don't know how much there is to just going like, oh, you don't love people, by the way.
But don't love people. Don't maintain relationships at all.
Yeah.
That's not cool. Mm-hmm. I suppose it's kind of like there could have been separate orders of Jedi in the past, more like monks or nuns, you know, comparing to like kind of modern religious orders where they, you know, took these vows, and then maybe those were the people that survived certain, you know, situations or something. Or
if your goal is of service to the galaxy, which, you know, and of service to other living beings, the idea that you have to be able to love and care about every single one of them with the same degree of care and the same degree of caution, you know, that has a lot to say for itself. You know, unfortunately, even for the best intentioned person, it's incredibly difficult. And trying to make it just a blanket rule, you know, obviously there are some problems.
Talking from a George Lucas perspective, as soon as you say something is forbidden, the teenagers in the storytelling absolutely want to break that forbidden rule. Oh, yeah.
And that's just not a great rule to set up as like, oh, I'm sure people will be able to follow this one, you know, the powerful biological urge behind it. There'd be no problems there.
And even like in the end, Revenge of the Sith, Anakin, you are my brother. Like that is severe attachment. Everybody is guilty of this, of breaking this forbidden thing. And so it's unrealistic. And unfortunately, because it not only adds the layer of breaking the rule, but also the shame associated with breaking it, almost every Jedi is probably feel shame for breaking it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's no good when you're having, you know, your best friendships and greatest, I mean, those are also going to be your greatest working relationships in the Jedi when, you know, you're being taught to devalue what's really, in some ways, the most beautiful and significant thing about it.
Yeah, and I think that like relationships with a person that you care about, you know, in some ways more than yourself, actually interconnects you to the galaxy more. Yeah. It's just when the attachment turns into greed, that you can't let them go if something were to happen to them.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. But
yeah.
of course, the rule ends up being very extreme direct. I don't see the point of it. Just in my personal view, there probably was a time, either optional or it was something that everybody did for part of their life, but maybe not all of their life. I can definitely see that.
Like a vow of silence
almost
for a period of time to like understand your own internal thoughts rather than and your connection to the force. But maybe it wasn't meant to be always.
Yeah, I don't.
Or it was a personal choice, right? Yeah,
that's in my theory. Unfortunately, I'm not always in charge.
No, but it's interesting to muse about. But this ties into sort of the father-daughter sort of relationship that Rael almost has with Fanray, and wanting to protect her, even though she kind of doesn't want to be protected. She wants to take responsibility for herself and her planet, but they never communicate to have the conversation about their different perspectives.
Yeah, which of course makes it very much a father and daughter relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Because to Rael, it's self-evident that he's supposed to be protecting me. And of course, he came in when she was a teeny little thing. So back then it did, and because he's had this terrible experience losing men in the past, he's going after it so overprotectively that it's just going to make failure. She's smart enough and schooled in protocol and all of these things. She was a toddler. She's able to hide some of it from him and from almost everything.
Except for her, I would say most loyal companions, who see probably the true self, and she's probably communicated with.
Yes. Darren and Katie. But of course, those are people who are answerable.
Yes. And she holds power over them.
Right.
In some ways. I really appreciated her line. It was early on when you first are introduced to her about how much she appreciates the young rulers of the galaxy.
Yes.
I love that. Like the Queen of Naboo and the King of Todaria. It was a really interesting way to show how much maybe the galaxy was relying on this kind of fresh generation. I'm not 100% sure what you were going for with that.
Really, I was just going for the sheer diversity of that galaxy, that they rule each other. The different forms of self-governance are incredibly varied.
Yeah.
You have Naboo that's like, we want a 14-year-old to believe his purity of heart is the most important thing. Like, really? Okay.
That's your choice.
And it is. That's how Naboo does it. And, it would make sense that some planets that had a very strong monarchical, hereditary tradition, you would wind up with kids in charge a decent
regularly
time.
Yeah.
So it was really just more about, in the galaxy, there are people as young who are running the show.
So for Rael, you mentioned that Cavan took on this character, but was he a character that you created entirely on your own? Was he an inspiration from others?
No, he was something I created by myself. I knew that I thought it would be really cool to have Jedi Regent. And at first, all I knew about him was, he has Jedi. And it was very hard to get his voice. And, very early on, the idea that he might have also been Dooku's, and that you had this thing in the Order where a former apprentice, a young knight might be a kind of more informal to a Padawan.
Mm-hmm.
But I know this master and I've worked with them, and, I know they're a little less intimidating, not that this would ever be an official duty you would have, but where, circumstances aligned for it, it seemed like that would be a very natural happen, would have sometimes these relations. And so that got to be Rael and Qui-Gon's relationship.
It almost created like a weird family with Yoda and Dooku and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and eventually Anakin and Rael, like all in there. Like it created this, I don't know, in some ways like ancestry from a Jedi Master and Apprentice relationship. It was really interesting to see that play out.
Yeah, and the fact that, pretty much any other Jedi Master Rael to conform, but Dooku, despite being as different from Rael in an interpersonal way as it's possible to be, he liked the idea of plastic.
Yeah.
He liked the idea of plastic. So that made him somebody to teach Rael a tremendous amount and let Rael keep, going on with his highly idiosyncratic
Exactly. I liked how especially the audiobook did a really good job of his accent to show like how different from sort of the Coruscantian accent
It's so
was
weird.
developed.
I never thought about specifying this. I don't know why. And it doesn't really matter. I did think they did a great job in the audiobook, but in my head, for some reason, he was like Australian.
Oh, interesting, because they made him kind of more southern.
I know. Just what I heard in my head was a little more like Aussie outback, I guess. But, it doesn't really matter. The main thing is that it does sound so different from this, we call it aristocratic or Coruscanti, but it means British, accent.
Yeah.
We're used to getting.
Exactly. And we get some insight into, of course, Dooku and Qui-Gon's relationship through flashbacks and kind of how Qui-Gon viewed the prophecies from his master and how Dooku himself went through sort of periods of change. And I loved how interconnected this and Dooku Jedi Lost were. Like they just play so well because you almost get two sides of the same scene at one point.
Yeah, you do, which is so great. Kev and I had a lot of fun.
But one thing I really thought was super interesting was Dooku is still a Jedi Master, and he used lightning to protect Qui-Gon at one point against Chandra Maul, who was a horrible person, by the way.
Yes.
Like, I want to kill this one person, so I'm going to kill 1,000. Okay.
Yeah, she's the worst.
And I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's how they pronounced it in the audiobook. But
yeah, Chandra Maul.
And it made me think, I know that the spelling is different, but it made me think of Maul, like how scary that character must have been.
Yeah.
And just kind of the impact and how just wanting destruction this character was, and that the lightning was used in some ways in a good way.
Well, it's sort of the
it was interesting
of Anakin. Anakin's reaching toward the darkness is about protecting somebody he cares about, and Dooku already has his own issue. He's been tempted, I think, by the darkness before this, but he reaches for it when it looks like Qui-Gon's going to be killed, and his, the fundamental thing motivating him is, or should be, a very positive, his love for his Padawan. But of course, there's all this weird shame and everything mixed up in it, and he draws on this dark power, and I don't know that one causes the other, but it can't have helped, can it?
No, but I found it just like a really interesting moment with the dichotomy of that situation, in that like he is trying to use this, he's trying to protect his Padawan first and foremost, but that we end up in some ways getting this repetitive Star Wars It Rhymes storytelling with these moments of, somebody has fallen down this path before Dooku. They fall because they're not able to reconcile this fundamental challenge to their soul in some ways.
Yeah, we do see it. And, we still don't know quite enough about the moments, that Ben Solo becomes Kylo Ren, but, there seems to be some hint that some of these things play into that as well. That is a guy who does not know how to process, but that's a little for
Doesn't know how to process his own garbage.
Nope, does not. No Dianoga.
No Dianoga. Which is, like an amazing story in a certain point of view, if you haven't read that one.
Story in the whole collection. Like, that, the Dianoga, now my favorite characters. It's like Princess Leia, Qui-Gon, the Dianoga, Han. The Dianoga just vaulted way up there. It's such a cool thing.
So interesting. The Baptist.
Yeah, and it merges Star Wars, which is space fantasy, with actual science fiction just for one brief moment, which is about as long as it can hold, but it holds really well.
And like just the inner insight of a garbage monster is just so cool.
Yeah, Omi, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to just touch on the forgiveness that Yoda offers Qui-Gon and understanding. And it was kind of a glimpse of the Yoda that we see in The Last Jedi. And I think that like how he's so understanding of Qui-Gon, even throughout kind of he seems to have these moments, these epiphany moments where like we got a good one in Dooku Jedi Lost where he leaves Dooku his lightsabers, like just because you've left the Order doesn't mean you're no longer a Jedi, which I I love that moment. But this one, like when he actually kind of forgives Qui-Gon for kind of going off the rails and doing his own thing, I thought that was really great.
Yeah, even though Yoda is definitely not as much in touch with the living force as he will be, probably once was in the prequels, he's still Yoda. He's still going to be capable of that kind of, it may be coming more in flashes or glimpses, and only when he's allowing himself to really look at that. But yeah, he's still Yoda.
He was done really well, and I loved how like the council's like prophecies, oof, like all of these things, and then Yoda's like, well, maybe we should believe him. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Yoda's like, I think it's a really bad idea to go looking for prophecies, but if we suddenly said, oh, no Force user ever saw the future, that would be a lie.
Yeah.
He knows it can be legit. The problem is just how most handle that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want to pivot and talk about the amazing ship. And I'm not talking about spaceships. I'm talking about Paxara that you have presented to us. I'm talking about Rahara Wick and Pax Manifer. Mm-hmm. They're amazing.
Thank you. I love my jewel thieves in space. I really do.
Like, they're cute and charming, and they're little, like, I don't know, melodrama of will they, won't they, figure it out. So cute and wonderful. Thank you for bringing that into the story, Claudia.
Well, you wanted something that would be away from the straight plot line of the monarchy and the palace. You wanted something that's going to be a little bit looser and more fun, but also tie into the bigger themes of it, which of course, Rahara's backstory finally does. And yeah, I mean, we know from what I write, I'm a big sucker of romance. And, the minute I thought of them, like they seemed to like each other of their own accord, I'm like, well, we're going there. Okay.
You're like, the characters are telling me that they like each other. I better make this happen.
Yeah, basically. And I kept going like, what is Pax's problem? And it was really late in the game when I actually figured out his backstory. I'm like, oh, of course that's why he's acting. He has no idea how humans are supposed to act. Never given that information at any time. So that was a lot of fun to do.
Like a classic guy who doesn't understand his own emotions trope, like, is so good. And they reminded me of C-3PO and R2-D2 sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, just because he's like so much like a protocol droid.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of ties between C-3PO and R2-D2 and Anakin and Padme, so it kind of felt a little bit like that too. Like, just kind of how they end up playing it out, and like Sherlock Holmes and Watson from Elementary, like that kind of dynamic a little bit. Like, he had a little bit of a Sherlock Holmes-y feel to him, a little off the cuff, but the fact that they were jewel thieves was so fun.
Yeah, and I love the idea that being a jewel thief in that galaxy really mean like picking up what isn't worthwhile somewhere, but is worth a whole lot somewhere else. And it's like, well, of course that would happen. And the minute I started thinking about what that would be like in the galaxy, I knew I had characters doing that. That was just too interesting a sideline not to get in.
Something that's garbage for you is valuable for somebody else. That sort of idea. Another play into the symbiosis of the overall galaxy too, that things are all kind of interconnected.
Did I tell you the fan casting in my head? Is it fan casting if I do it?
Yeah, tell me the fan casting, please do.
Okay, nobody knows Pax unless you're a big fan of repressed British people solving crimes, which is like my single favorite genre of TV, particularly if it's in period. They're in period costume. But there's the show Endeavour. Okay. It's the prequel basically to the big Inspector Morse series. But the actor who plays Endeavour Morse, Sean Evans, you can look him up, it's Haun. He's Pax, and then Gemma Chan is Rahara.
I need to fan cast Gemma Chan into everything because I love her so much.
Yeah, I know. I love her.
How do we get her in Star Wars?
Well, I made my but I've done what I can do.
You're like, Gemma Chan. We'll just start making a Gemma Chan summoning circle and then summon her into Star Wars.
Yes, just intone it over and over and over. Nice.
So fan art creators, if you're interested in what Claudia Gray thinks they look like, there you go.
There you go.
You've got some art inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
This all kind of plays into sort of the consumption theme that we get through the story itself, especially, with the old corporation, Zerka Corporation, which amazing tie-in to Knights of the Old Republic. Thank you for
There's
that.
a couple others, like I have some Cell Cap in there, and there's a couple of other things, but yeah, Zerka was the big one. I was like, please, I need something like Zerka. Can I have Zerka? And they're like, yeah, Zerka's still around. Yes.
Zerka's still around.
Yeah.
I heard that in in the story group's voices, like Matt Martin and everybody just being like, aha, yeah, sure, why not? So what is it about Zerka? Like they're so evil, and
yeah, they're the worst, and they've been around forever and ever and ever.
I mean, I think the quote was that they're potentially older than the Republic.
Right, nobody's quite sure, but it would go back about that far.
So it's like they've been around that long. They've kind of always used their techniques to, in some ways, capitalistically, slavery is the cheapest way to get labor. So they end up using, corporal punishment and basically, mass enslavement through indentured servitude to have that happen.
Yeah, though really, I mean, in a lot of ways, droids probably would be cheaper. Because, I mean, Luke and Owen in A New Hope, they buy some droids almost sort of on a whim. They're like, yeah, look at that one. All right, okay. Like, they can't be super expensive. So what exactly is going on there? I think there is the whole thing in the book where Zerka has slaves because they can't. It's that corrupt, really. Whatever power they have, they're going to hang on to.
That's really interesting. I didn't actually think about it that they have slaves just because they can. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, very much leans into the idea of the dark side that, like, maybe that is a holdout from the old Sith from long ago, needing to have pain in the galaxy to have the dark side grow.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it was maintained by the silent Sith through the generations of the Republic, like allowing Zerka to still have this.
It's hard to uproot the thing that seems like it's always been there. You don't even think about it. It's so omnipresent, you don't go, wait a minute, how do we change that?
Right.
And the Republic obviously has always, the individual planets or systems have clearly always had a pretty wide diversity of the way that they do things and what's allowed and what isn't allowed. Things are sort of been able.
Yeah, and it walks the line because, it's not officially not illegal because it's, using people who have become indentured servants and then, not really even questioning whether they should,
right.
And just kind of continuing on the path. But it does sort of open up questions about sociologically why this still exists.
Yeah.
I guess because things are good for quote unquote most people means you don't necessarily see the other people that might be suffering because of the things that are good for you.
Yeah. What is that line from The Handmaid's Tale? We made the world better. Better is never better for everyone.
Right.
Something like that.
Thank you, Margaret Atwood, for being poignant. I wanted to, podcast What the Force. We got to talk about the Force always.
Uh-huh.
But, there is this kind of question with the idea of prophecies of the future being deterministic. Like if you can see the future and you have no ability to change it because, you're almost playing into it as soon as you start to listen to the prophecy.
Uh-huh.
That really kind of creates sort of this question about free will in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah, I wonder about it too. Does it mean you're absolutely locked into that? Or is it more like a thing in a video game, like, oh, you may go through this. You may get this point, and if you do, you're going to be offered these options,
It's more like a choose your own adventure.
Kind of, yeah.
Cavan would be so proud of us.
Yes, exactly. He would be. And now I'm going to tell him about it. But
the Force visions are actually a choose your own adventure, Cavan. Think about it that way.
Something like that. But yeah, where it's like, maybe it's showing you not, oh, this is going to happen no matter what, but it's sort of like, here's a turning point, and what may matter more is not what you're being shown in that vision, but what you might do after.
Oh, how it actually affects you. It's very 3D chess.
Yeah.
I love the idea that Yoda says, always in motion the future is.
Yeah.
So it is in some ways kind of like that. Like, I'm going to present to you these options at this moment, but does that mean that you'll actually choose them? Because in some ways, Yoda and Obi-Wan in Empire Strikes Back are very certain that how things are going to play out. And then in Return of the Jedi, they're like, no, you got to go and confront him. And he's like, but I can't kill him. And he's like, well, then we'll all die and we'll all fail.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but it was actually the love that saved his father. So,
yeah, which, of course, Yoda and Obi-Wan had their whole lives spent with people telling them that that's exactly what you can't trust. So, of course, they didn't. They wouldn't be able to be trained not to.
I loved your tie back to Chirrut with the Force is with me. I am one with the Force.
Yes.
It was beautifully done. And also it ties very closely back into, the mantra and the balm of the luminous that Cavan Scott used in Dooku Jedi Lost to find balance. Yeah, I turn towards the light. Not because it's good, but because it is the light. Claudia, those words have haunted me.
I'm glad you enjoy that. That's definitely the bit of that. It's not about winning. It's about following this path that is the right path. Involve kindness and listening and decent action. That's what it is.
And it ties so well into, the idea that sometimes we can't always change the evil inside of us or the dark intentions or the dark thoughts, but if we turn towards the light like Rael and Qui-Gon do, you're still walking forward. You have the choice at any moment, and in a very Buddhist or a Zen sort of way, you have the choice always. It's always in your corner to choose the light.
Right. It is a series of choices. It's not this binary thing necessarily, as black and white a mythos of Star Wars be. We do see more shades of gray now, but also, it's always the choice that you're making. You can't ever say like, oh, well, I made that choice. That means back then it doesn't matter. It's always going to matter.
It was a really interesting introduction of the holocron of prophecy.
Yes.
And it's like, well, it happens to be all in one place. You can just go and look at it.
Yep.
Check it out from the library.
Yep, they've got it there. They're not pretending it's not a thing. They don't trust it anymore.
And thank you for our brief, ever so brief glimpse at Jocasta Noon and Dooku.
Yes, hanging out.
And hanging out, having confused eyes at each other.
Yeah,
there's a history there.
What's going on, kids?
What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
But the prophecies in there, there's so many of them. And, some of them feel like they're very easy to interpret. Like, she who is born to darkness will give birth to darkness. But some of them are a little bit more like, is this more metaphorical? Is this... tell me about writing prophecies for this. Was it something that you had to come up with? Did you have to go and get everybody's approval?
Everything gets approved in the end, but even though I came up with them and I had different thoughts about them, including no thoughts about some of them. And it was funny because I really think one of the ones I made up off the cuff is the one that everybody's like, see, it was foreshadowing Palpatine's return. And I'm like, it does read that way.
You're like, maybe I'm smarter than.
I did not think that.
Maybe I'm prophetic.
I didn't think that was going to be a factor. Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's the takeaway from all of this, I hope. But I kind of made things up. And of course, I was thinking about Leia when I wrote that one. But it could just as easily apply to something else. And I definitely had, young Qui-Gon look at some of the prophecies that we would think, oh, I know what that is. And he thinks he knows what it is because he's thinking about other events. Because, anybody who watched any television special about Nostradamus at any time knows how easy it is. So
yeah. Because they're generic enough that it could apply to other situations. And, are they more metaphorical? Are they directly literal? Like the danger of the past is not past, but sleeps in an egg prophecy. That one's a little whoa. But then you're like, you know what? There's a giant egg that actually exists in the Poe comics, so maybe that actually means something. I don't know.
I cannot speak to prophecy. If I do that, I'm going to begin believing I'm a prophet. We can't go there.
No. But I just found them really interesting because, they seem like they could be a parent, but maybe they're not.
Yeah, which is the whole thing, which, and that's the part that Yoda and the council aren't wrong about, is like, this is tough to interpret. This is not, oh, I know what this means, and you can absolutely seize onto it. It's I don't know. It's interesting to watch.
I really loved how much this just primed us and it lays as almost a perfect prequel to the prequels.
Yeah.
In that, like, it primes us and goes, oh, okay, now we understand Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's relationships when they enter in The Phantom Menace. Now we understand how Qui-Gon's relationship with the Council is kind of strained and weird, and yet they still kind of respect him.
Right.
Enough to be like, as much as you're disobeying us, we'll just pen this for another discussion.
Yeah, we'll get back to this later. Like, oh God, what is, yeah.
Like even Obi-Wan himself, like how he, develops some of his fears and apprehensions, and the love of his little lizard mount.
Yes, yeah, Fractal.
Yeah,
fun to do.
There's so many interesting things. What was your favorite thing that you set up that helped you view, or you hope that will help people view the prequels differently?
Oh, that's interesting. I think it's something about what we were talking about, how this is before anybody knew it was going wrong. Sort of that the Phantom Menace represents a big break, to them as much as to us, that, wait, what's happening? This was an event that galactic history is beginning to be dragged in this new direction, that it's beginning to spiral out of control. This is sort of one of the last moments in time before that is happening. It's, and I think by spending some time in this republic that is confident of remaining, and where all of these people are, for the worst, complacent, but also people who have grown up with, peace and freedom, and, a reasonable expectation of being treated fairly in most places, which is about as much as government can manage, that they had this and they had taken it for granted. And we see later how easily.
That's just great. Like, I feel like it just sets up and it helps us understand the tragedy of the prequels that much more.
Yeah.
Because this wasn't just the Phantom Menace happened, Sidious arrived out of nowhere. This was something that had been built over time, and rot, the sickness of the Force and the Republic itself had been building for time. And in truth, that's how we get intergalactic or world wars, right? It's something that builds over time until it reaches its crack or its breaking point, and then the larger conflict happens.
Yeah, exactly. That, it isn't, just the Trade Federation did this and everything was fine before that. It had to get to a point before the Trade Federation could even think about it, before that was even a possibility. So hopefully it adds that kind of perspective.
I think it does. So well done, Claudia. Again, another brilliant addition to your overall Star Wars resume.
I'm happy people seem to enjoy it and kind of relieved. It was a panicky one to write in some ways. So I'm happy it seems to have gone over pretty well.
I think that next time you tell me that you're nervous about writing a book, I'm just going to be like, okay, Claudia, we've talked about this. Remember when you were super nervous for Master and Apprentice and it ended up being super dope? Stop it.
Fear was real, my friend. The fear was real.
I know. Well, it's like creator anxiety, right? Like that's...
Yeah, if you're not worried, then you should.
Then you should worry.
Then you're phoning it in, yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you for talking about that. Is there anything else like that you've got upcoming or that you wanted to make sure people were aware of from your overall, projects you've got going on?
Yeah, my other April book was Defy the Fates, which concludes my original sort of space opera series, the Constellation series, which was Defy the Stars, Defy the Worlds, and Defy the Fates. It's set about 300 years in the future. Earth is dying. It has several colony worlds, but the colony worlds are beginning to want to split apart, find their independence. That's the one that I always talk about as being born from the idea of what if the movie Prometheus did not suck? what if you had a religious character who was actually religious, not Hollywood religious, which means she has a cross around her neck, regarding an artificial intelligence who both has programming that dictates some actions, but an actual personality and mind and motives of his own. Like, how do you judge this person's responsibility, culpability? Who is that? Is this person with a soul, basically? And those are the elements that come together in that series. And other than that, like, I'm actually working on a ton of things, but none of them are coming out very soon, which is great. I have no huge deadlines for the first time in many years.
Hashtag Project Luminous.
Actually, I'm also working on graphic novels, a series of graphic novels. I'm not allowed to say who they're with yet. They are not Star Wars.
Ooh.
We're going to finally announce those this fall. So that's sort of the main project that I'm working on.
Lots of work, no deadlines. Hopefully that works for you, Claudia.
We'll find out, won't we?
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting about Master and Apprentice. Just a shorter chat this time, but still very in depth about the themes and the characters and the relationships and the I guess almost like status of a galaxy far, far away before the prequels, because that's a very fascinating time. And as we peer into it, it certainly does tell us a lot about how it set us up for our Star Wars and the Skywalker saga. So thank you so much for having this chat with me. And I loved Master and Apprentice. And everyone, if you've already listened to all of this, why haven't you read the book already? Go and read the book if you haven't. If you have, I hope you really enjoyed this. Claudia, where can people find you?
You can come to my website, which is seriously overdue to be redesigned, but it is claudiagray.com. That's Gray with an A. And from there, you can find like toggles that will take you to my different social media. I'm not super active anymore, but my assistant keeps my Twitter updated with appearances and my schedule. And, I am still on Tumblr being a nerd. And you can see pictures of my dog on Instagram if that's the kind of day you're having. But yeah, thank you so much for having me back to talk. This has been a lot of fun.
And check it out if you haven't already checked out Master and Apprentice. And of course, check out all of the works by Claudia Gray. Cheers. Thank you, everyone, for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love What the Force, In Wild Space, Night Huntress, and Susan. We are available wherever podcasts are found and YouTube. You can connect with us at Twitter at WT Force Show or on Facebook at What the Force. Feel free to reach out to us and start a conversation. Cheers.